Hi guys, back with another film, and today we have a really meaty film to get into. It's Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman. You've probably heard about it. It won the Grand Prix prize at Cannes, which is like second to the Palme d'Or, and Spike Lee has been around 30 years, I guess. This film says a lot, and I'm going to talk about how that all folds into that cross-section between politics and art. But let's do our usual thing. First, I'm going to say whether you should go see it. Second, I'll talk about the film generally, and then we'll get into spoilers. So should you go see it? I think everyone should go see this film. It's rated MA 15+, but the violence and language which gives it that rating, they're pretty benign. I think if you had a political kind of teenager, you could probably take them. And I do think that this film speaks to everybody. Although it's an incredibly American story, I think we all are living with the ramifications of racism. And Spike Lee is one of those guys. I don't really always like his work. He's got a very particular style. And when it hits, it's amazing. But when it misses, it's pretty bad. And I remember seeing Do the Right Thing and loving it. This is 25 years ago, only to find that later on Spike Lee explained the film and it was totally the opposite meaning to what I had taken. And then I really didn't know what to think. Anyway, be back with this film in a second. Okay, so let's just talk about the film generally. And normally I don't talk that much about plot, but this one is kind of incredible. So the story is set in 72 in the film. In real life, it was in 79, but you get the idea. This is a long time ago. And famously, this guy, black guy, the first black policeman in Colorado Springs, named Ron Stallworth, which is, couldn't have a kind of more American kind of name, joins the police force and slowly kind of gets, disenchanted with his options and finds that he's in the intelligence unit because they use him to go to black rallies because there's a real fear that this is about the time when the Black Panthers are coming up and there's a real fear of violence. So he does his job, and as part of that, he then sees an ad for wanting recruits for the Ku Klux Klan, which just kind of beggars belief. But then when you see stuff nowadays, who knows? Anyway, he famously answers this ad, even though he's a black guy, and joins the KKK, and obviously he needs then an offsider to be the face of him, and that's his partner in this whole incredible journey. So once you hear that story, this is why I think this film really works, when I not always love what Spike Lee's doing. And I think this is because the story, no matter who made it, that story is just so incredible. Then when you add the flourishes that Spike Lee can make, he's got really big hitters behind him. The producers are Jordan Peele of Get Out fame and Blum of Blumhouse. So people who really know how to put a film together and be interested to know whether they were involved maybe in the editing because it's a tight film. So already the story is amazing. You then add in Spike Lee's, both his take on America, and then you also take his cinematic knowledge and his technique. So we have to talk about one of the main things in this film, which is it is from the outset talking about how film is a propaganda device, that it is myth making. So the opening shot of this film is the very famous, probably arguably the most famous dolly shot in cinematic history. And it's the scene in Gone with the Wind when the crane shot is going back and you can see Scarlett O'Hara with all the Confederate soldiers, and as it goes back, it's after Atlanta has been taken, and it goes back and you just see more and more and more people and soldiers, and it gets back to you see a fluttering Confederate flag half burned. And now Gone with the Wind is famous for this myth, which is of the good Southerner, which is that wasn't about slavery, it was more about states' rights, that they were incredibly noble and just fought for because they thought they had to fight for their neighbours or whatever. So that's the opening shot. Then it goes on to kind of basically tell you the story that I just told you, or the setup. But then there's another scene later on which doesn't give you anything away in plot. The KKK later on, as a celebration, watch probably the most famous racist film of all time, which is D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Now that came out in, I didn't check the year, but I think it's 1916 from memory. It's something around that. It's a silent film. And it did a couple of things. So firstly, and this is the beauty and incredible complexity of art, is it technically was brilliant. A lot of people say D.W. Griffith was the first person to do all these things. Nearly everything that he gets credit for had already been done in Europe and sometimes in Australia, actually. But he probably put it all together, and it is one of the greatest blockbusters in history if you added up just ticket sales. And what he famously does is he intercuts two stories so that your brain processes the two stories coming together. And it's incredibly powerful. And you can imagine for a naive filmgoer, it really blew their minds. But what it also did was in 1916, the Klan was dead. You got to remember this is about 50 years after the end of the Civil War, and really Reconstruction had gone on. There'd been horrible things that had occurred, but a new generation had come through, and really, like if you think about science fiction films always show the desires and insecurities and fears of the current populace. And this is what Birth of a Nation did. It's a science fiction film because what it does is it shows blacks in Congress being corrupt and such. And the Klan, it beggars belief if you've never heard of this film, the Klan come in like cowboys. They're shot like cowboys. You can see, like when you see a John Ford film, John Wayne films like Stagecoach, the way they shoot cowboys and heroes is exactly how the Klan are shot by D.W. Griffith. And the Klan are the heroes. They save the white women, they save the white people from these kind of nefarious black soldiers. It is confronting when you see it. Like I saw it a long time ago as part of once I started to want to educate myself in film. I don't know how it would be for a contemporary American to see it either black or white. It would be a bit of a shock to the senses. So this is what the Klan watch, and the reason why I'm talking about it is because I'm not going to talk about any plot elements, but if you're clever enough, and Spike Lee's clever enough, he intercuts in his film exactly how D.W. Griffith intercuts in Birth of a Nation. He's saying a lot about film, and he's saying a lot about contemporary America. It's really quite brilliant, and I'm not one who, as I said, applauds Spike Lee that much. We're going to talk a lot more in spoilers about how all this comes together as a message, but let's talk about the cast. Now, the lead, Ron Stallworth, is, I've got to check it because this is the first time I've really seen him, although supposedly he was like a kid in Malcolm X. and it's John David Washington. So, gee, have I heard that name before? It's Denzel Washington's son. And he is really good in a very hard role because he's got to do a few things and he's caught between the world of the police and his own culture and race in a film which is highlighting that. So I thought he was very good in a really hard role. Adam Driver is his partner, Flip Zimmerman, and he plays a Jewish guy who doesn't really identify as Jewish and therefore has to confront some of the things that he feels about his identity. He's forced to. He's never kind of done it before. And Adam Driver, in my opinion, steals the film. He is by far the best actor in the film. He is great. It is a really nuanced performance. He's acting as if someone acting who's also acting. It's really, really good. There's other, I thought, look, Laura Harrier, I didn't know her. She plays kind of the girlfriend, but the leader of the local student union. She's very charismatic in a small role, but she's really good. Topher Grace. Now, Topher Grace plays David Duke, who you probably have heard that name. David Duke is, I don't even know what he is now, but he was at that time the head of the KKK. And you've heard him because he's still alive, and he famously tweets all the time and gives support to Donald Trump. And that's one of the things that probably we'll talk about in spoilers. The other thing I wanted to say is Michael Buscemi's in this film. Now, Michael Buscemi is the brother of the famous Buscemi, and I actually don't like him in films. It's not that he can't act, but I'm always going, he distracts me because I always think, is that his brother? So it's a little bit weird. And finally, I just wanted to call out Corey Hawkins. Now, Corey Hawkins has only really one scene, and I'm going to check the name. He plays Kwame Ture, who's a real guy, but couldn't be the way he's historically given in this. But I think they must have taken one of his speeches and just put it in the film. And he is incredibly charismatic, giving this speech really early on in the film, the one which Ron Stallworth attends to just find out what the Black Panthers are up to, and he is great. Finally, there's one cameo, Harry Belafonte, and all he does is he tells a true story. And we'll talk about that in spoilers, but I think once you know that's a true story, that nothing's been conflated there, and that it's Harry Belafonte of all people telling this story, it really has an impact. Great cast, really well made. Let's go to spoilers because I don't want to ruin anything. Okay, I'll be back in a second. Okay, we're in spoilers now, but there's a lot to unpack here, and it wouldn't surprise me if I missed some things. I might even have to edit and check my notes again. The first thing I wanted to say is there's a million definitions of art. But what I consider one really good definition is art poses questions that can't be deflected. They must be reckoned with. And what Spike Lee does with this film is he puts a proposition to you that you either are with the racists or you are not. But you can't be in the middle. You can't have this false equivalency that has existed in America before, that he makes very clear. He takes a great risk in this film. We're in spoilers. So the end of the film, after we've gone through the whole Ron Stallworth story, and it's a really, really good story. It's really interesting. You want to know more. I didn't know anything about it, and that was great because towards the third act, I was going, what is going to happen here? I really don't know how this story is going to unfold. But the capstone is, at the end of the film, Spike Lee has then put in an edited package, which only goes for maybe a minute, 90 seconds, of which it shows in 2017, should I say, various activities from the alt-right in America leading up to the Charlottesville rally and the murder by car impact of a protester there. And the film's basically dedicated to her, came out on the anniversary of her death. And I think her name's Heather Heyer, but I've heard different pronunciations. And I tell you what, like, I was weeping in the cinema. You could have heard a pin drop. I mean, no one was under any illusion as to what Spike Lee had done. He had taken a great risk. He dates this film. He puts it in a historical perspective. He says, this is now. This was, and this is the link in between. Same as when he did Malcolm X. Began with the historical beating, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy, and led to the LA riots. He was making that link between what is and what has been and how they historically affect people, and he's done it again with this. Let's talk about some of the techniques he uses to do it. So he does a thing which, I don't know what the term is, I'm calling it this, but I don't know if it's a real thing. He uses whiteface. Now, what I mean by that, because I want to be precise, I've never used the term before, is because Ron Stallworth is on the phone, but using kind of a laboured, neutral voice, he says the most hateful, racist things, the kind of things you would say if you were in the KKK or wanted to join or whatever. But the tension is you're looking at this, handsome black face saying these horrible things. And the tension is when you hear them like that, they're so stupid and so ridiculous that you start to laugh, even though they're hateful, because they're coming out of this black face. You just can't, your brain can't kind of process it. It's really quite clever. And it also means he can say all these really horrible things without the film going so heavy that it anchors it. You get this lightness. And sometimes it's a little bit too much, I think. There are a couple of scenes where they're all around the phone and the whole team. And I don't think they especially work. It is a very clever device. The other thing I wanted to talk about is there's a scene which I've alluded to already where, and I talked about it more in a technical way, in which they use the intercutting, very similar to Birth of a Nation. But in this film, now I can talk about it, what they're doing is they're cutting between the Klansmen talking about their rights as the superior race and the Black Student Union, who are also talking about black power and wanting to assert their power over themselves and in America. Now, this is very clever and it's a little bit nuanced, and I hope people get this because I think it would be very easy, the way that Spike Lee edited this, to come away and go, oh, Spike Lee made the two equivalent. Because that is your first thought, because it ends with the Klan kind of going white, white, and then the blacks going black, black. What you need to think about, and what I think Spike Lee means by this is, the white people are saying, white, white, we're superior to the blacks and to others. What the black people are saying is, we're equal. We just want our place in society. It's a big difference. I think if someone looked at that and got the equivalence message, which seems to be this cancer in political discourse now, you would be getting the wrong message. It's interesting. Is this a perfect film? It isn't. Now, one of the problems that I think Spike Lee has is he's got a balance between, is he talking about the system or is he talking about the way in which these problems just will always exist? And the way he does that is by having a policeman as the role. He's got to dodge between, is it just systemic racism, which is evinced by the police, which is the argument put forward by the black student union leader, or is it that good people in positions of power can change? And I don't think he's actually quite clear about how all that works, although maybe there is no answer, maybe that's just ambiguous. I think the pacing is very uneven, and especially in the, I guess you'd say second act, it really drags a little bit as they set some of this stuff up. But then he has a great third act, which I think brings it all together. The other thing I wanted to quickly talk about was I mentioned Harry Belafonte talking before. He plays a guy named Jerome Turner who recounts a true story. Because when you're hearing the story of this lynching, the way he's talking about it as if he witnessed it, that is all testimony which actually occurred. And you're really almost in shock as Harry Belafonte gives this story. And it so doesn't feel like acting at all. Like, I mean, it is really, really good. I just wanted to mention one thing. One thing I hate in Spike Lee films is he famously does this kind of weird double dolly shot, which is people will be kind of almost floating and you don't see their legs. And he does it in every film and it never worked. And for the first time in this film, it does work. And what he does is he kind of does a blaxploitation kind of cut on near the end of Ron Stallworth and the girlfriend who have heard a noise, they think they're under attack, and they kind of do this weird shot down a hallway, and they kind of got their guns out, almost like as if they're in, you know, Superfly or something, and then you see in the distance a cross being burned, and really, you know, there is no change. I also would have liked, I think it really deserved at the end of the film something like Ron Stallworth then went on to do whatever, because really what Ron Stallworth did was he didn't do anything. He just went, wow, this is too crazy. He left, he moved to another area, and he worked as like an inspector for 20 years, didn't tell anyone the story, and wrote a book. Look, this is an incredible movie. I think everyone should see it. I think it's the kind of film people will be talking about, and I think it'll probably be arguably coming up in the award season. It's really worth your time to watch it and have a think. I'd love to see someone who's on the right watch this film, like an alt-right. Like I've got a couple of friends who are really into Trump, like even in Australia, into Trump and all that. And the funny thing is when you talk to them one-on-one, often, and these are good guys, like, but they will say sometimes horrible things. And then you unpack what their view is, and then they'll go, oh, yeah, well, I don't really mean that, but the language they use is horrible. It'd be interesting to see what they would think if confronted with this image of themselves. Okay, that's it. Tons of films coming. I didn't get to Meg. Oh, I've heard it's really bad. I guess I should see it. I'm on Twitter at Guru Eden. If you like what I'm doing, hit the like, hit the subscribe. You'll always get all my stuff. I've got book reviews going up, sometimes a bit of TV, and definitely films. And I'll see you around. Okay, bye.